Clockmaker's Promise. In the heart of a small European village, surrounded by fog-covered hills and whispering pine trees, there lived an old clockmaker named Elias Varden. His shop stood at the corner of Market Street, a tiny wooden building with a crooked roof and a dusty window filled with clocks of every shape and size. Some chimed every hour, some ticked so softly they were barely heard, and one, an enormous golden clock hanging above the door, hadn't ticked for years. Elias was known not only for his skill, but for his silence. He was a man of few words, with silver hair, deep lines on his face, and hands that trembled slightly when he worked with the tiny gears. Every morning he would open his shop at 7, wind the clocks, and sit by the window, polishing brass and glass until sunset. Children passing by would press their noses against the window to watch him, whispering that he could fix time itself. But there was something strange about Elias's clocks. They never broke once repaired by him. And some villagers claimed that when he fixed a clock, something in their lives seemed to change. Arguments ended, long-lost letters arrived, or illnesses faded away. Elias never explained why. One cold autumn evening, a girl named Clara appeared at his shop. She was perhaps 16, with pale skin, brown eyes full of tears, and a small broken pocket watch in her hand. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "It belonged to my brother. He's gone now, but this was his favorite thing. Can you fix it?" Elias took the watch gently, turning it in his palms. It was a beautiful piece. Silver casing, cracked glass, hands frozen at 9:12. He opened the back and saw something no ordinary clockmaker should ever see. A heartbeat, faint and flickering inside the gears. "This isn't broken," he whispered. "It's waiting." Clara frowned. Waiting for what? Elias looked up at her, eyes soft. For time to forgive. She didn't understand, but Elias promised to fix it. "Come back in 3 days," he said, "and bring no one with you." That night, long after the streets emptied and the village bells stopped ringing, Elias sat under the dim glow of his oil lamp, the pocket watch ticking faintly in his hand. He opened a drawer and took out an ancient key, the same one he had sworn never to use again. He placed the watch on the table beside the great golden clock that hung above his door. It was the first clock he ever made, and the one he never sold. He turned the key, and for the first time in 50 years, the great clock began to tick. The shop trembled slightly, the air thickened, and the hands of every clock in the room froze at once. Then everything went silent. Elias closed his eyes. The shop disappeared. When he opened them again, he stood in a sunlit field, the smell of rain and grass all around. A young boy, Clara's brother, was running through the field chasing a paper kite. Elias walked toward him, calling softly. The boy turned, surprised, and smiled. "Who are you?" the boy asked. "A clockmaker," Elias said. "Someone who fixes what time has broken." The boy laughed. "You can't fix time." Elias knelt beside him. "Maybe not, but I can give it one more chance." He took the silver watch from his pocket, wound it once, and handed it to the boy. "When this stops ticking," he said, "someone will miss you enough to find me." The boy stared at him, puzzled, but took the watch. The field began to fade, and before Elias could say another word, the sound of clocks returned, louder and faster, like thunder rolling through the shop. He woke at his desk, the oil lamp nearly burned out, the golden clock ticking slowly above him. The pocket watch was repaired, perfect, shining, and alive. When Clara returned on the third day, Elias handed her the watch. "It works again," he said simply. She wound it, and as the ticking began, tears streamed down her cheeks. "It sounds just like when he was alive." Elias smiled. "Maybe he still is. Somewhere, time still remembers him." Before she could thank him, a bell rang outside. The great golden clock above the door chimed 12 for the first time in half a century. The sound filled the shop, deep and pure, echoing through every corner. Clara turned to look at it, amazed. When she turned back, Elias was gone. Only his chair remained, empty but warm, and a note lay on his workbench. It read, "Time cannot be owned, only borrowed. When you listen to its ticking, remember every beat is a promise, not a possession." Years passed. The old shop was eventually closed, its clocks gathering dust once more. But the villagers still told the story of Elias Varden, the man who could fix time. And every year, at exactly midnight on the anniversary of his disappearance, the golden clock above his door would chime 12 times, though no one had touched it since. And if you listened closely in that moment, some said you could hear his voice whisper, "Keep your time with kindness." The Clockmaker's Promise, Part 2, The Echo of Time. Decades passed since Elias Varden vanished, but his legend never faded. The old clock shop remained untouched, locked, dusty, and silent, as if frozen in the very moment he disappeared. Grass grew through the cracks in the cobblestones, ivy climbed the wooden walls, and the once golden sign now hung crookedly, half faded by time. The only thing that still worked was the great golden clock above the door. Every year on the night of October 11th, it would chime 12 times. The villagers called it the Midnight of Time. People gathered in the square to listen, believing that each chime carried a message from the old clockmaker. Among the crowd one night stood a young man named Thomas Reed. He was tall with dark hair and tired eyes, a student of mechanical engineering from the city. He had come not for legend, but for truth. In his hand, he held an old silver pocket watch, one he'd inherited from his late mother, Clara Reed. It was the same watch Elias had fixed all those years ago. Thomas had grown up hearing stories about it, how his uncle had died, how the clockmaker had vanished, how time itself had paused for a heartbeat. But to him, they were only fairy tales, until the night the watch began to tick again, on its own. He looked up at the golden clock as it struck 12. The sound was deeper now, almost human, a low hum that vibrated through the ground. and when the 12th chime faded, Thomas noticed something strange. The clock's hands began to move backward. The crowd gasped, some praying, others running. But Thomas didn't move. The ticking grew louder, faster. Every clock in the square began spinning wildly. The air shimmered with gold light, and before he could breathe, everything froze. Silence. The world had stopped. Thomas stood alone, surrounded by motionless people. Even the fog had frozen mid-sway. Then he heard a soft voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Thomas turned. An old man stood in the doorway of the shop, white hair, trembling hands, and kind, tired eyes. It was Elias Varden. Thomas stepped closer. "You're supposed to be dead." Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps I am. Or perhaps death is only what happens when time forgets your name." He turned and entered the shop, motioning for Thomas to follow. Inside, everything looked exactly as the stories described. The dusty shelves, the rows of clocks, the faint smell of oil and metal. Except for one thing. Every clock was ticking backward. Elias sat at his workbench and gestured to the pocket watch in Thomas's hand. "You've brought it back." Thomas frowned. It started ticking on its own. I didn't know why. "Because it remembered," Elias said. "Every clock I ever made carries a memory. Some hold love, some regret, some forgiveness. That one." He paused, touching the silver watch gently. "Holds a promise unfulfilled." Thomas's voice softened. "My mother, Clara, told me you brought her brother back for one moment. Was that true?" Elias's eyes glistened. "Yes, but I broke a rule. I turned time backward when it wanted to move forward. That's why I disappeared. Time took me instead." He stood, walking toward the golden clock that now glowed faintly on the wall. "Every year when it strikes 12, I get 1 minute to step into the world again. 1 minute to see what time has done." Thomas swallowed hard. "Then why me? Why am I here?" "Because time has chosen you," Elias said quietly. "You're the last link to the watch and to the promise I made long ago." He placed a small golden key in Thomas's palm. It was warm, almost alive. "This key winds the heart of time itself. But be careful. Once you turn it, something will return, and something else will fade." Thomas stared at the key. "What do you mean?" Elias smiled sadly. "Every repair requires a price. What would you give to fix what's been lost?" Thomas looked around. The clocks, the dust, the faint ticking that echoed like heartbeats. "I'd give anything to see my mother again." Elias nodded. "Then you already know the cost." He stepped back as the golden clock began to hum. Brighter, louder, the shop filled with swirling light, gears floating through the air like stars. Thomas turned the key once. Click. The clock stopped. Then time exploded. He saw faces, memories, echoes. His mother's laughter, the field with the paper kite, the old shop, Elias smiling, and the sound of a single heartbeat growing louder and louder until darkness. When Thomas opened his eyes, he was standing in the field. The sun was shining. A woman stood by the river, smiling at him with familiar warmth. "Mom?" he whispered. She turned, eyes full of tears. "Thomas?" He ran to her, hugging her tightly, feeling her heartbeat. "I thought I lost you." She smiled. "No one's ever lost, my love. Time just forgets to look sometimes." In the distance, a bell chimed once, soft, golden, endless. And far away in the silent village, the old shop stood empty again, but the golden clock above its door ticked once more, forward this time. Inside, on the dusty workbench, lay a note written in a trembling hand. "He has fixed what I